Hello guys, it's me Juvin, and I'm back with another Tableturf tier list video. The tier list has gotten so big now that I can't really fit everything in the screen. But this part is going to be pretty special because I'm going to be ranking all the 312s. Now if you're not really active in the Tableturf community, you may not know what a 312 is. So I'm going to explain that briefly. A 312 is basically any card with a 12 size, but only 3 special points spent. A normal 12 size card would usually require 5 special points to use as a special attack. So these are pretty good for special attacks. Drawback is that they don't have a special space inside of their cards. Almost every competitive deck has one or two of these 312s, because it's very important to have these for the endgame, since they're so good special attacks. The only time where you'd really not want to use a 312 is in box seats, because it's such a small map where it can be hard to really fit these cards. Okay, so now that everyone knows what a 312 is, let's start ranking them. So let's get started with Trizuka. Trizuka is actually very solid. It has a lot of range, can kinda wrap around some spaces, like for example this wall in lakefront, or just a special space. So you may ask, what's so important about the 312 having range? Let me explain. It's a bit hard to show, but imagine if these cards are the opponent's cards. So this big one, this ballpoint, this rapid and this Takaroka are from the opponent. And this Ouroboros and this Seko is from you. So the opponent is presumably trying to set up for a jelly combo, like this. However, they probably haven't drawn it yet, because otherwise they would have already played it. So what you can do to prevent this combo from happening is using a special attack. We have a Seko right here that we could use to prevent this jelly from happening. But let's say we have a special attack with not a lot of range, like Boya Bomb. And you can see here that no matter what position we put it, we don't actually prevent the jelly from happening. But you could see here that a longer range special attack would pretty easily disrupt that spot. So in general, more range is better when it comes to 312s. And depending on the map, it can be more or less important to have diagonal range. And I think Trizuka is very versatile, has a lot of range, has many options a lot of the time. So I'm gonna put it in best tier actually. Moving on to Big Bubbler. Big Bubbler has a lot of range, so it must be good, right? Well, not really. See, the most important aspect of a 312 is if it has symmetry or not. And what I mean by that is that it has rotational symmetry, so you can't rotate it at all. And that's really bad for a 312, because you want to have options, because they're mainly used as special attacks. The opponent is likely going to have a lot of special spaces where you can't put this over that. So a lot of the times you're just not gonna have a good spot to place this at the endgame. To illustrate my point, Japanese player benisun made this chart that portrays the 312 with the most amount of visible locations and the 312 with the least amount. So for example in Main Street you can place Tenta missiles 426 different ways, and Big Bubbler is 76 different ways. And you may have already noticed that in almost every map, Big Bubbler is the worst in terms of having a lot of options where it can be placed. Literally only double Gemini where it's not the case. Big Bubbler may not be that versatile, but does it have any strengths? You may know the Boya Bomb combo, but that's not really a thing you'd ever want to do, because you just don't activate special points. However, you may want to do this with Octoballer, and it does have potential in my opinion. I have tried doing this in games, and if it's not within your base, it is very unlikely to actually pull this off. Because Big Bubbler is just so big that it's very unlikely you don't just clash with your opponent and ruin this combo. I think Big Bubbler could be used with a similar purpose as Octodisco, where you can defend and attack at the same time and win clashes against big cards. However, it's not really as good as Octodisco because it leaves these diagonal openings. So you could, for example, fit a Slosher through. So I hate to say it, but Big Bubbler is going to be put in very niche. Alright, the next card is Zipcaster. Zipcaster I think is pretty similar to Trizooka, it just overall has a lot of range and especially diagonal range. One cool thing about Zipcaster is that you can use it like an octobrush. For example, if you defend your base like this, your opponent could actually play a Zipcaster right through here. Other good thing about Zipcaster is that it pairs very well with Captain and against Captain. As you can see here, Zipcaster does activate Captain's special, so it's a pretty common card to use in backup combos with Captain. Also, you could use Zipcaster to go through an opponent's Captain for free. A year ago, Captain was super popular, so Zipcaster was also pretty much the best 312 in the game. But while more cards were added and the meta was developing, I think Zipcaster fell off a bit, so I don't actually know if I want this in very good or in best tier. For now I think I'll put it barely in best tier. Don't really need Captain for it to be just an overall good card, but I think Trizooka is kinda just outclassing it a bit, but it's not that big of a difference. The next card is Tenta Missiles. Tenta Missiles is 6 long, which makes it pretty nice. It's very thin, so it can fit in a lot of places, but the drawback being that it doesn't really have diagonal range. Tenta Missiles is also nice for base combos. Its shape allows for a lot of different combos. I think it does get outclassed by Ultra Stamp in a lot of cases, which I'll talk about more later, but I still think it belongs in really good. Now it's Inkstorm. Inkstorm in a lot of maps is very good for base combos. It can fit around the starting space where it activates specials easily. If you're wondering why you'd use a 312 in a base combo, it's more of a backup thing rather than the main combo you'd want to use. But it's pretty good for 312s to be able to combo if you don't find the cards you really want. And if you do find the cards you want, then Inkstorm can still be used as a pretty good special attack, right? It's pretty good in that regard. The main thing is that it really lacks range, just because it's only 5 spaces long. But it is probably like the best combo tool as a 312, so I'll put it in good. Next is Boya Bomb. Boya Bomb is like an extreme version of Inkstorm, because it's much worse at actually being used as a special attack. Again, you have limited options because you can't rotate it, but it has a severe lack of range. However, it is very compact and has a good shape for combos, so there's a lot of times where I'm just experimenting with base combos and I find a perfect Boya Bomb spot. And I especially think Boya Bomb has value because it can be used as a replacement for Octoballer. So if you don't draw your Octoballer in time, or if you use Octoballer in another place, you could just play Boya Bomb instead. Another noteworthy thing about Boya Bomb is that it completely fits inside Kohosuna. So if you know your opponent is playing Kohosuna, you may want to cheese them by playing Boya Bomb. Of course, that requires you to have a special space next to your opponent's Kohosuna. If you play Chargers or a Stinger, it shouldn't be too hard to do that. So it does have a few things going for it, but still the symmetry is really not great. So I'll just put it in niche. Moving on to Wavebreaker. Oh boy, another symmetrical 312. Yeah, Wavebreaker kinda sucks as a special attack, but it's pretty hard to use in base combos because it's so big. So really the only time I'd ever use Wavebreaker is if I have Spike and Annie in my deck and I want a third one of those. What sucks about Wavebreaker is that the lack of a space in the middle actually ruins so many combos for it. As you can see, like I can't even really activate any of these specials. So it's not even that good in checkerboard decks. So I think I will put it in very niche. And next is Inkpack. It has a pretty peculiar shape that allows it to kinda go around a lot of balls or specials. It's pretty good in Mask Mansion and a few other maps. If you have Sloshing Machine, then you could do this kind of weird combo with it. I think the main problem with Inkpack is that it has no diagonal range really. It just doesn't reach as far diagonally as something like a Trizooka or a Zipcaster or a Spos Green. It's a pretty unique 312 and still a good card. Next up is Killer Whale. Killer Whale does have the problem with symmetry, but it does have 2 options for rotation, which is much better than 1. Still not as good as 4. It's also a pretty awkward shape to use if you're not building decks around it. But I'd say it works pretty well with Dapple decks, and also with the Squid Sisters and Sloshers. If you have Flow in your deck, it could be a pretty good backup card. It does have some uses, but again, the awkward shape and the symmetry limits its potential. I will put it in niche. Here we have Inket. It's a 3x6, just like Ultra Stamp and the Tenta missiles. It has a perfectly straight line, which can make it very good for combos and just being put against the wall. I think the best part about Inket is its combo with Moss. The shape of this card has some hooks on the edges, which can make it good for activating special points in a special attack. However, this can make it pretty hard to have a perfect value special attack, because it has two spaces close to your special space. Still, I'm gonna put it in really good. Next up is Ultra Stamp. Ultra Stamp is also super good for combos. Shape makes it pretty easy to activate certain cards. The thing that sets Ultra Stamp apart from other 3x6 312s is that it has this thin stretch of spaces before being more bulky here. And this is a really good thing for special attacks, because you have a minimal amount of spaces in your turf, and then it's a bit bigger here where it can be used in the opponent's turf. It's just so versatile and good. Very often leads to 24 point swings. So the only real downside is that it lacks a bit of range diagonally. It's one of the best 312s. Next up is Crab Tank. But because it's so big, it can be hard to actually get a very good value from it as a special attack. However, because it has so much range in a lot of directions, it is one of the better cards to use as an early aggressive special attack. If you have an aggressive deck where you want to often special in and disrupt your opponent's combos, Crab Tank is one of the better options for that. Yeah, I think it also belongs in really good. The next card is Reef Slider. I think Reef Slider has a pretty solid shape for being used in combos. The shape of the tail is similar to Inket, which makes it pretty easy to activate special points. Main thing holding Reef Slider back is the little nub here under it that makes it a bit thicker than you'd really want. So especially in thinner maps, it can be hard to really use this as effectively as something like an Ultra Stamp or an Inket. And it still doesn't really have that much more diagonal reach to compensate for being wider, like Trizuka or Zipcaster. So I think it just belongs in decent. The next card is Triple Ink Strike. Triple Ink Strike kinda has the problem like Reef Slider and Vac, where it's pretty wide but doesn't actually have much diagonal range. I think it can be fine if you have combos for it, maybe if you have Octo Stamp in your deck. And I will say it is one of the better cards for Cracker Snap along with Zipcaster, because you can just go through the middle like this. But other than that, I don't really see the point of using this card. It's a bit clunky. I'll put it in decent. Next up is Tacticooler. Tacticooler has a pretty weird shape, but if you plan around it, it can work. Tacticooler also perfectly fits inside Marigold. And Marigold is a very common card in certain maps in the meta right now. So I could see this being used as kind of like a counter pick. Other than that, this card is very wide and thick but doesn't have much range. So that's its main weakness. But I think it just barely reaches good tier. Next card is Kraken Real. Kraken is also a pretty good diagonal card. Especially like to combo it sometimes with stuff like Tri-Stringers. It's a bit outclassed by the other diagonal 312s, but it's still really good. Super Chumps. Super Chumps do lack a lot of range. The main two things I see it being used for is that it does go with Shelly and Donnie pretty well. It's honestly a pretty good replacement for Big Man 1, as you can see here. Outside of this, I really don't see a good reason to play this card. I think it belongs in decent. Next card is Triple Splashdown. I think Triple Splashdown is best used in this kind of deck where you have a lot of ballpoints and rapid blasters and stuff like that. Here you can even use it around your starting space and fit the rapid. It does lack some range, but it's a really good card for comboing. Put it in good. And finally we get to splatter across green. Green just has so much range diagonally, it's only tied with Shelly and Donny. It's even really good just as a normal attack just because it has so much range. Sometimes it does go through your opponent's bases without even having to special attack. There's really not that much to it. The range of this thing is just so insane that it automatically makes it the best 312. It is super common in top level play. And there we have it. That's all the 312s ranked. Now we only have one final part left, where I will rank the biggest cards in the game. That's gonna be really fun because the biggest cards are probably the most important cards. So I hope you will look forward for that. So I'll see you guys then. Bye.